this study, we found that painted cycle lanes increased risk. We also looked at infrastructure with some level of separation from motor traffic. We found that this kind of infrastructure, which we called cycle tracks for brevity, although mostly we're talking about shared footways, this kind of infrastructure didn't increase risk considering the data as a whole, but neither did it reduce it. When we separated out the intersection and the non-intersection locations, we found trends in different directions. So away from intersections, there was a trend towards reduced risk, which didn't reach statistical significance, and at the intersections, we found a trend for increased risk. So as with the lanes studied, much of this infrastructure was largely poor quality. We're talking mostly about footways turned into shared space for walking, cycling. Generally, there's a lack of protection at junctions and generally often flared entrances to side roads, for instance. By contrast, a study in London where we looked at different types of protected infrastructure, we found that curb separated and stepped tracks had a strong protective effect.
So the three main categories that we looked at in terms of cycle tracks were curb separated. So these are cycle tracks that are separated by continuous or near continuous physical upstand, usually separated by verges or curbs. Then you have stepped cycle tracks. So these are again vertically separated, but also at a different level to the main highway. And then finally you have the light separated cycle tracks, and these are protected by intermittent objects, normally kind of planters or bollards. So our study found that curb separated cycle infrastructure reduced injury odds by around 40% compared to no infrastructure. We also found that step tracks were even more protective and reduced injury odds by 65% compared to no infrastructure. But because they are less prevalent, there was a bigger confidence interval there. Mandatory cycle lanes were found to be insignificant. Then advisory cycle lanes were interestingly found to increase risk by around 30% compared to no infrastructure, which I think to begin with seems kind of counterintuitive. But when you look at kind of some of the existing advisory lanes that are in London, you can kind of see why that actually might be the case. And indeed, some of those advisory lanes will probably not pass TfL's new quality criteria.
So I think the findings of this, along with the findings of our main study, suggest that cycle infrastructure as it currently exists across Britain is not protecting cyclists, but that it is possible to do so with higher quality infrastructure, such as that has been built in London more recently.